Thanks, Kevin. Councillor Heney, will you take your motion?
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm advocating on behalf of My Lovely Horse Rescue, on my own behalf and on behalf of members of the public who desire best practice in terms of how we deal with animal welfare in the city. And my motion, if I may read it into the record, Chair, following a recent successful prosecution by Gardaí in a court case involving animal cruelty against a carriage horse owner in Dublin, and in order to reduce or eliminate cruelty to horses in our city, the Dublin City Council review its horse-drawn carriages bylaws. In the context of that motion, Chair, I'm asking, I suppose, and I take what Kevin has said prior to me taking my motion, I'm asking that if the Council and if this committee would agree that the Council would engage with an external group to include a representative from My Lovely Horse, a Garda, a licensed carriage driver and equine professionals, either a vet or a farrier, to continue the review of the current draft bylaws, and that Dublin City Council would take account of the suggested amendments from such a group based on feedback from their, I suppose, deliveries. Also, I would like to ask that the Council would ensure that any Garda who is contributing to the review of the draft bylaws would be a mid to high-ranking Garda from a station that is experienced in dealing with carriage licensing issues, a station such as Kevin Street or Pearse Street. Now, Chair, I know that a document has been submitted to the City Council, to Kevin Mead, and he has advised me that there are legal difficulties around the review, and on that basis, you know, I am willing, and I'm sure everybody else is willing, to allow the Council to pursue a resolution to that legal difficulty. But in the meantime, I'm asking if certain changes could be introduced without a review of the current bylaws. One would be a carriage licence visibility. Members of the public are having serious difficulty reporting carriage drivers operating with horses in poor condition because of I suppose, the difficulty in viewing or the non-visible positioning of the licence, because at the moment it's a metal licence plate that's affixed to where the driver's foot is. So without having to amend our bylaws, could we introduce some form of different licence that would be visible? And then secondly, could we introduce a horse certificate of health? Any vet, any equine vet could sign off on such a certificate, and maybe make it part of the carriage driver and carriage licence application process. And this, I'm sure, Chair, you would agree, would achieve greater compliance with the law. I suppose I'll leave it at that and see what other speakers have to say, and indeed what the manager has to say. Gurmagat.
Thanks, Councillor. Do we have a seconder for that? We have, okay, thanks. Councillor McGinley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, no, this matter has been ongoing for a while. We've been contacted, it has, I guess, it's going back into last year, and we would have done some work on bylaws. I think a number of interested councillors would have met with the manager on more than one occasion, and I think a couple of other interested councillors in terms of the animal welfare issues were also directly in contact with the manager. But the point really is, the purpose of bylaws is to try and introduce some order to a disorderly situation. So the current situation isn't working, and in particular in front of the Guinness storehouse we've had instances of disorder on a significant public scale viewed by large numbers of people, and it has required attention from council officials and the Gardaí. So the operators are conscious of this, and clearly so they're willing to work on terms of trying to get order. And if we get order, we'll be able to manage things. Having regard to scarce road space, road space is very scarce. We're talking about the area between Thomas Street and the Guinness storehouse, so it does need to be regulated. So look, I was aware there were issues. I don't know how long. My one question, Chairman, is can we get any indication as to when the law agent might come back on this, because my understanding is I think the issues have probably been with him for a couple of months at this stage. And the carriage operators are keen to regularise it. We're only going to draw disrepute if there are incidents out in the streets. People, the general public, will be asking, what are the council doing about it? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much for the motion, Councillor Heney. I'd like to commend My Lovely Horse Rescue. They do exemplary work, fantastic work, and they raise great consciousness in relation to the way animals are treated in this particular city and in this particular country. There are certain individuals out there who have an absolute disregard entirely for animal welfare, and particularly horses. And we often see exactly what happens in this city council when we have to put down so many horses that are unregulated, untagged, and have been treated and used in this manner. It's not just in the city, it's across the country. So I commend them, and I think it's time that the state stood up to this. There are a number of issues at stake here. One is Dublin City Council can only deal with those horses and those carriages that it licenses. And those carriages that are licensed and where they park, that's what we deal with. However, the law is not there to deal with the general issue of horses and horse carriages. It simply isn't there. There is a law to deal with animal welfare, and we need to employ that particular law. I understand the difficulties here in terms of how you are trying to go about this situation. It's a bit like the busking thing, where we went out to kind of deal with the buskers and we realised we'd no instrument. Until the state and until the government begin to bring in proper legislation for animal treating, and particularly in relation to horses across this country, we're going to be lost here. There are a number of young men, children, driving horses through this city. It's reckless. It's crazy. The animals are being abused. People on those carriages are being abused, and there's no instrument, Chairman, for us to be able to impact on that. On Garda Síochána don't have the instrument. If 3 kids, 2 years of age, want to come down that street in a horse, there's nothing we can actually do. We can bring in all the animal welfare, but we know what happened in Smithfield, and we managed to contain that. We're in a very difficult situation at the moment, and I would ask that we'd all give Dublin City Council's management the opportunity to address this particular issue. And in the meantime, we would actually enforce the animal welfare issue. If we have to seize these horses, we have to seize them. Unfortunately, if we do that, then we have to put them down. Or we actually give good funding to my Lovely Horse Rescue so they can actually do the job for ourselves. Again, I commend the motion. The motion is excellent, and I'd hope that the motion will get support. But I'd also like to offer, as I say, support to Dublin City Council. It's extremely difficult out there. I see it every day in the streets out here. But as I say, this is a difficult issue, and let's get it right. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Bramson.
I'm quite happy to support the motion. I'm just curious, maybe it's because I'm relatively new to this committee, what the precise legal difficulties are in relation to bringing the bylaws before the committee.
Let the manager answer that in a few minutes. Thank you. Councillor Vinci.
I had the same question. I was going to ask whether we can get involved in horse welfare issues as part of our regulation of the carriages.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Okay, Manager.
Sorry, could I just add just one if I may, Chairman? I just think it's important. There are many people out there who have horse and carriage who are licensed, who are exemplary, and they look after their animal welfare really well, and it's important that message goes out. There are those who treat their animals with absolute respect, and that is well known. So it's important to remember that is the case out there. However, there are the other cohort. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Councillor.
As I stated, at the moment there's a legal impediment prevent me from bringing the bylaws forward to the SPC. I'm asking the members for forbearance to allow me to address the issue and not to leave a legal lacuna. And that's really the situation, and as far as I can comment on the moment, at the moment, like I said, I'm very conscious of leaving a legal lacuna, so that's why I would appreciate members' forbearance in resolving the issue. In relation to the law agent's advice, the situation is we have the law agent's advice which backs up what we thought was the legal impediment, and we're currently in legal negotiations with a third party. So at this stage, that's really all I'm prepared to say.
Okay, thanks, Manager. Councillor Heney, are you prepared to defer this for the next SPC awaiting legal advice?
Okay, thank you. Can I just have can I ask for clarification on something? If
You
if the manager can't reply, I accept he can't reply. But is the legal impediment presenting the draft review of the bylaws, or just the bylaws in general as they stand?
Unfortunately, as they stand.
Well, I'm prepared to put it off to the next council, to the next SPC chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. That's appreciated. Okay, can we move on to item 8?
So yeah, item 8 was a request to look for publicity in relation to warning members of the public in relation to the dangers of smartphone usage. A report was presented there going back quite some time ago. Just in addition to the report, at the time we said that we'd put a web insert on our website. As members are probably aware, the council's website is being thoroughly overhauled with a more public-facing interface. Once that is redesigned, we will obviously put the insert on, and we're going to have to get some design team or photographers or whatever to design the actual web insert. We'll also put the adverts on bus shelters, on our allotted advertising cycles, on the JC Deco advertising boards, and on the big belly bins. And as discussed with Councillor Kennedy earlier, I think the motto we'll use is be smarter than your phone, watch where you're going.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to express sincere thanks to Kevin for his work on this. I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, this motion has been on the agenda on a number of meetings now because it's been deferred, and there was the motion and then the report came back a couple of times. And to my surprise, this seems to be something that has taken up a lot of people's interest. I've gotten a lot of calls and approaches about it. It's a very small thing. I constantly am reiterating this isn't a desire to introduce some kind of new offence. I had to explain that to one of my ward colleagues, and not Councillor McCartan, before this meeting. But it's just to raise awareness of something that hopefully is a problem that we could improve very readily. And I really do appreciate how constructive Kevin has been on this.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor McGinley.
Yeah, thank you. Sort of a related question. I'm just wondering, one of the things I observe is people cycling using smartphones. I'm wondering, is that an offence or not?
Thanks, Councillor.
I'd imagine it is an offence of not being in control of the bike, and it would be a matter for the Gardaí. They can issue on the spot fines for something like that.
Okay, is the report noted? No. Okay, move on to item 9, to review the Papal Transport Travel Arrangements presentation.
So, thanks, Chair. This was a request from the Chair of the SPC to do a quick review on the Papal Visit Transportation. At the time, I said that quite a bit of the data and so on that would be accumulated wouldn't be to hand, but I suppose it was to give an overview of how the City Council and the various agencies went about organising the transportation for the event on the 25th and 26th of August. I suppose to this event was really covering two different areas, I suppose. One was the city centre and the surrounding areas of the Phoenix Park, and the second was the Phoenix Park event itself. We also had the Crow Park event, which for the purposes of the Crow Park event, it was treated as a normal Crow Park event, if you like, whether it was a music festival or whatever, so there wasn't a specific different plan for that. So I suppose the various different sections or the various different people who were mainly responsible for it obviously was our events section with John Downey, Environment Transportation Department and a number of different areas, the National Transport Authority, Garda Síochána, the event organiser and the OPW. So it was a complicated enough web of people involved in it. From our own point of view, our Roaders Control Unit were the main area, along with events that were engaged initially for a number of months in this. The applications for all the roadwork or for all the road closures had to be assessed. We had to advertise then the response to comments from the public, and we got quite a number of them. The statutory orders for road closures. We also had a requirement to ensure there was no roadworks on the various different paper routes and so on. We also added in the fact that we had to make sure that our own road maintenance crews and so on were not out working along the area. We also had to assist with the request for bike parking. So on the day of the Papal Mass in the Phoenix Park, there was a bike parking hub in the civic offices just at the amphitheatre. As I say, traffic management, then our traffic management control section under Andy Walsh with his staff then would have worked with the Garda Síochána and the OPW on the various different routes. So these were both the walking routes and also the routes for the public transport to get to the various different hubs where people would be dropped off and how they would get to and from each of the areas and what the particular issues were. We hosted a helpline in our traffic control centre along with the Garda Síochána and the OPW, and we got around 3,500 calls with queries on that. We also hosted an inquiry email service which was attended by my own staff, and they got around 800 emails in the week leading up to the event, clarification on whether they could, visit different places, move around the city. There was a lot of people who wanted to go to various different hospitals or were concerned if they had to go to hospitals and so on. So I suppose while there was different cordons in place around the city centre, there was a real emphasis from Garda Síochána of local discretion to make sure that people would be accommodated if they could be. During the event, then on the Saturday and Sunday, there was our traffic control centre was our main hub, I suppose, for our own activities. But we also had one of our senior engineers, Andy Walsh, in attendance in Dublin Castle, which was the event control centre, and that was acting as liaison for all aspects of the City Council, so drainage and all the other ancillary activities. We had additional traffic control staff and specialist staff on duty over the weekend as well. And we had 2 Garda resources in our control centre the whole time, along with Dublin Bus. So Dublin Bus would have had an inspector in with us as well. Our own radio station, Live Drive, then broadcast during the weekend. We brought the whole operation in, and they broadcast both on Saturday and Sunday. I suppose just to take the 2 events and just to show you some photos from our own camera systems. On the Saturday, there was emphasis was obviously on the city centre, and it was mainly this the movement of the Pope from the Pro Cathedral up to Church Street, but there was an earlier visitation into Dublin Castle to meet the various different people there. So the road closures were as required by Garda Síochána, and the road closures themselves, a lot of them were to do with setting up the type of infrastructure that you see in the pictures here. So whether it's the screens here or the actual location for the press, and then the actual barriers for the public. So there was a good amount of work involved in actually setting it up so there would be a safe route through the streets and the crowds would be safely managed. But also there was an emphasis on ensuring the public transport operated. So as long as possible, public transport operated along these routes and then were diverted onto alternative routings. And again, the streets were really reopened again as soon as possible after the event. So, for example, this is the Pope moving through Westmoreland Street, and it kind of gives you an idea again of the infrastructure that was in place, the barriers, the crowd control that was necessary, and just the general setup, which really necessitated a street closure for a couple of hours to actually accommodate this. The Sunday, on the 26th of August, then there was, I suppose, widespread road closures really from 6 o'clock in the morning. The idea behind this was to ensure the safety of pedestrians walking to event. So I suppose, as you all are probably aware, there was a real emphasis on using public transport, walking from the public transport hubs to the event. Don't take your car. You're not going to be able to drive close to the park. You're better off to walk and so on. What that entailed was that we had to leave the streets open for pedestrians to walk on. There was no point in having a press of pedestrians on the footpaths and then, causing them safety issues. So we also wanted to allow public transport to operate freely. So, as I say, we did have the various different pedestrian or public transport hubs. And I suppose the one thing we could emphasise, the closures were advertised as being from 6 in the morning to 11 in the evening. They were actually, all roads were reopened in our area, were reopened by 2000. So it was a lot earlier than planned. As I say, there was emphasis on public transport hubs, so, some of the transport hubs would have been at Belfield, Colmore Road, Dublin Port. We also had buses held in the city centre on Johns Road for the end of the event, so there was an emphasis getting people to the event. Once people were in the event, you then saw something like this, which is in Wine Tavern Street, just outside the civic offices, where you can see the buses lined up 3 in a row, pointing the wrong way up the street. But all those buses were there to actually be close to the city centre, so that people after the mass was concluded could walk to these. These buses were then taking them. These particular ones were then taking them out to Belfield, where they had cars parked or whatever, or further transport on to their final destination. So it was quite impressive from a Dublin Bus organisation point of view to organise these arrangements. And there was a real emphasis, as I say, on making sure there was safety for pedestrians. So this is pedestrians on Pargate Street approaching the Phoenix Park. This is at 12:15 on the day. This is Castleknock, again approaching the park area. This is Chapel Lizard, so Chapel Lizard Bridge. So I suppose, there was a lot of criticism of the extent of the road closures, but as you can see from the number of people who were actually on the road, it was necessary that a lot of those road closures took place to allow these kind of numbers of pedestrians to be safely transported through the area. I suppose everybody knows that the numbers at the Mass were less than anticipated. The planning for all this was to have, possibly double or even triple the numbers. So that was why there was so extensive a road closure. Again, North Circular Road. Then finish of the Mass coming out from the Phoenix Park. And here's the North Quays, where you can see, as I say, returning from the Paper Mass along the North Quays. Again, you can see that would have caused quite a bit of problems if the pedestrians were all corralled on the footpaths. Further down towards the James Joyce Bridge, again, you can see the numbers of pedestrians there. The guards and Dublin Bus, the NTA and ourselves worked very closely. This is an example of getting some buses under guard control to the correct location, to the correct hubs. It's a kind of very advanced form of bus priority in the city, but unfortunately we can't have it every day. Also, we should emphasise that there was other operators other than Dublin Bus who provided a number of hubs. So these were lines of buses lined up near Philsborough, again waiting for the end of the Mass. So I suppose one of the couple of the main points was that public transport carried around 100,000 people on the day, and because the city centre could reopen fully by 8 o'clock, it shows you how little delays there was in bringing people brought out from the city centre. It was an operation to carry more people than they did in the end, but leaving that aside, we couldn't control the numbers. We had to plan for what we were told we were expecting. So from our end, I would have said it was quite successful in that aspect. This just is an illustration again of what Cook Street looked like, again beside the civic offices. Again, the sheer numbers of buses lined up waiting for people at the end of the Mass so basically people would walk up to here, buses would load up and off they go. So this was I thought it was a very slick and professional operation that Dublin Bus ran in this area. And I suppose this is my favourite photograph because it's rare I get to stand in the middle of Bachelor's Walk and take a photograph with no traffic. So I walked down. I was in work over the weekend, but I took the opportunity of walking down and taking this photograph of Bachelor's Walk with absolutely no traffic on it, just as a memento. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Manager. McCartan.
Thanks very much for that very comprehensive report. I think the committee should put on the record our thanks to all of those involved, from the Gardaí to the NTA, Dublin Bus, Dublin City Council. On the Sunday, I got the bus from Belfield to Cook Street, did the walk. It was quite an exceptional feeling walking towards the Phoenix Park with no traffic. It was rather a surreal experience, and particularly on the way back. Now, I know numbers were diminished. I think there was an attempt by the media to discourage people, saying the walk was too far and the weather was going to be too bad and whatever. The numbers were a little bit disappointing, but that being said, the buses were certainly in Wine Tavern Street. The manager I counted 35 buses, and when we went around to Cook Street, there was great camaraderie, and everybody who had gone to the park, to the Mass, particularly enjoyed the experience. And of course, all of these bus trips were free. There were individuals using buses that didn't know which end of a bus to get on. They hadn't been on a bus. One man told me he hadn't been on a bus for 25 years. He actually gave the driver a tenner for his troubles. And I said, you didn't have to pay him at all. But I think it is important to put it on the record that in an event like this, I wasn't around on the Saturday, but I know how efficiently that was run. And it is important to acknowledge that when there's a particular event, that we pull out all the stops. It looks as if you may not have to do that now in relation to a particular visit by the President of the United States, but that might be only false news. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Mr. Guiney.
Thank you, Chair. Look, our views on the management of the whole papal visit is on the record. I believe there will be a debrief and a review of how it came together, and I think that's very welcome, because I do believe that there are lessons that we can learn in terms of this event. The communications, certainly to the business community, were late in coming, and often they were confused and they were conflicting. And I think that did give rise to a degree of confusion amongst the public, and I don't think it was particularly helpful. Just to put the numbers in context, the footfall in the city over the course of the weekend was down by 19.2% on the same weekend in the previous year, which equates to roughly about 130,000 people. I think it could be extrapolated from that if we took cars out of the city completely, that will be a level of reduction in footfall and consequent trade. So the trade was down by roughly about 30-35% over the course of the weekend. We do handle a lot of very big events in the city. So every other Sunday over the summer, we have about 80-odd thousand people going to Croke Park, and we handle that particularly well. And we can diffuse those kind of crowds quite easily. As I understand it, there was probably about 130,000, maybe 150,000 in the park, which is 6 kilometres away from the city. So I think we can handle big crowds, we do, and I think there are lessons to be learned from the event when the Pope was here. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for the comprehensive report, Brendan. I mean, it was an exemplary plan, and it would have worked extraordinarily well had you had the 400,000 people, but they didn't materialise. However, the point of the matter is that quite a large amount of the city was accessible, you know what I mean? But again, there was a huge amount of confusion in terms of what was closed and what wasn't closed, and the information that was coming to the business, certainly in the southeast area where I am, was pretty appalling. I mean, many businesses simply had to close, they had to throw out food. And as I say, it's no way to actually treat a city. And the impact of that on the city, on the economy, is huge. Absolutely massive. I mean, you could have, played 10 football games on the roads and on the streets. There was no real threat. And that should have been really obvious, I think. And again, the city should have been opened up And again, how are we going to actually, equate all of this down the end of the road to the economy of the city? As Mr. Guiney pointed out, this has a genuine impact on businesses and begins to close the city down entirely. So the city became a frightened zone, in my opinion. It really did. It became a kind of a peculiar place. I mean, all around this particular area here, completely and absolutely closed, and there wasn't a sinner about. You have a photograph there of a road closed, but also there's nobody on the street, because nobody came into town because they didn't know how to get in and out of town. And I think, I think it's an exemplary plan. But the point of the matter is that it closed the entire city down. And I don't think you can recover from that situation. So I look forward to when the debriefing takes place and the whole issue takes place. And I'd ask those business representative organisations to liaise faster and quicker and get the information out to the businesses, because they were left completely in the dark. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Councillor. I think we should endorse what Councillor McCartan had said. So thank DCC and the guards and everybody else that's involved in it. Thank you. Okay, can we move on to the next item, please? The minutes of the Cycling and Walking Subcommittee, are they noted? Agreed, okay.
I was interested, and I don't know whether I've lost track, but the stationless bikes, where are we at with the stationless bikes?
Currently, we've only one operator who has available licence, that's Bleeper Bike, and we have 450 bikes on street at the moment. It's been a huge success as far as Bleeper Bike are concerned, and we've no problem in increasing the number of permits allocated to them. The other operator had some technical difficulties, and we've allowed him until the end of September to seek a available licence. Yeah, it's more in the outer suburbs, because it's a complementary service to Dublin Bikes.
Okay, Councillor Vinci.
Thank you, Chair. I follow Bleeper Bikes. I worked with them quite a bit before we passed the bylaws, and I've been following on Twitter. I haven't had a chance to use them myself yet, but I've been following them on Twitter, and what I have noticed, and that's why I thought I'd bring it up, is that if anybody finds that a group of stands are getting dominated by Bleeper Bikes, so if you arrive with your own bike and there isn't space, if you tweet them, they'll send somebody out to move them on, they'll make sure they're reallocated, etc. They're really responsive. I think they've changed their tyres and they've changed a few other things as well to try and upgrade, and they seem to be making a real right go of it and communicating really well with people. So I think so far I haven't had any complaints, and I've noticed low-level complaints about the location of bikes, but what they have found is that unlike Dublin Bikes, a few of them have been thrown off bridges and stuff. So there have been they have reported that to the Gardaí. I think there was a few out on the kind of towards Inchicore near the canal there, ended up in the canal. So because they're not tied to anything sometimes, so that is something that they are finding, and I think they've raised it with the Gardaí, and I think there are proper and serious investigations ongoing about it.
Okay, thanks, Councillor.
Sorry, it's in relation more to the paper visit. You missed my hand up that time when I had it up. It's more in relation to the road closures on the north side of the city. On the south side of the city was grand, where the bus hubs were for people to walk to the park. But I got a lot of complaints of people actually going back home rather than going to the Mass on a Sunday, because the hubs were basically on the border between Finglas and Cabra, and to get from there to the park was impossible. And a lot of people actually turned back and couldn't go to the Mass because of the road closures.
Okay, thanks. Sorry I missed you out the last time. Councillor Costello.
Yeah, just on the Bleeper Bike, again, several people have been on to me saying how they're a fan of the service, but the challenge is, because the bylaws quite rightly say it has to be chained to a proper stand, it essentially can only spread where the stands are. So I think it's incumbent on us to put more cycling stands out there for cyclists, for the Bleeper Bike as well, and so that more people can use that option to cycle. So really, I think it highlights the need for much greater levels of cycle parking across the city.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Do you want to come in again, Manager?
Yeah, just on that point, we were very conscious of the fact that we didn't want to take away from public bicycle parking, so we have rolled out in excess of 4 times the amount of new cycle parking that we have allocated to Bleeper Bike, and that is the model that we're working on. and we're continuing to roll out further cycle stands. I think we're up to 1,900 now. 1,900 new ones? Yeah. Well, cycle parking spaces, which would be, 2 for each Sheffield stand.
Okay, Councillor Flynn.
Just on that, I mean, I do commend, and I do think it's good and we are getting there, It's just that the cycle stands at the moment are on the footpath. So again, the footpath then becomes finite. The space becomes less and less and less. And if you're going down to Georgia Street, for instance, you'll see 10 bikes stuck onto the footpath, onto those stands. In other jurisdictions, and particularly in the UK, they have the stands that actually fold on like at depots and various areas where you have, a small site where you can actually put bikes and rack them all up, and it's a very simple thing to do because there's only a finite amount of space on the footpath. Now, if you go down to Georgia Street and look at when the cars are making that turn there, they're literally having to avoid all the bicycles. So there's bikes being crammed onto these. So I think, again, we're going to run out of space on that footpath for bikes. There's no question about that whatsoever. So we're going to run out of space there or pedestrians. So we need to look at a new model of how we actually park the bikes. Because again, if you go down to Parliament Street, there's loads of space down there, and now we've got 4 and 5 more bicycle stands, and they just become crammed. The space becomes tighter. When you add in then street furniture and bins and all sorts of stuff, you're creating a massive amount of clutter. I understand you can't go onto the road because you're disbarred from doing that, but we need to find smaller spaces where we can put massive racks where people can put their bikes within the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor. One more speaker, yeah.
I just back up. We'd prefer not to have bicycle stands on the footpath, and I was given to understand that the majority of them were going to go on the roads rather than on the footpath. So I hope that still stands. I was actually very pleased to hear just recently from a DCC engineer. I think I'm not sure what he was doing with the cycle tracks and that, and I met him about another issue. And he told me that there's a load of free parking spaces being provided in Drury Street car parks, Drury Street car park, and maybe some other car parks, and nobody knows about them. The cyclists aren't using them. It's free of charge, and it's much more secure than parking on the street, but they're not being taken up. So maybe it needs to be a bit more publicised when those spaces are being made available to let cyclists know. That was just my impression talking to him, whether I'm wrong or not. But that's, if you're providing stuff like that, that'd be great because it's off the footpath, it's off the street, safer for the cyclists. They come back and their bike is still there, and and it's free of charge. So I think that's a really good initiative. But just to publicise it more would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Just in relation to the cycle parking, all the new cycle parking that we have provided for this project is, using my other hat, is in parking spaces. So we have allocated parking spaces for all the new cycle parking. So those ones on the footpath are historical cycle parking. In relation to Drury Street, I'm informed that it's running at full capacity. Full capacity, yeah.
It's not only been used, but we've recently opened an extension to it. So.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCarthy.
Yeah, that's my understanding that counter to what Councillor Flynn says, all these new cycle stands are being put on the roadway. There's a new one there outside 133 Lower Bagot Street. It's quite comprehensive. It's on the road. I've given the South East area manager a spot on Thorncastle Street there in Ringsend, where there's an ideal spot on the road. That is not correct to say they're on the footpaths. Most of them are on the roads, and I think the record should be set straight. Thank you.
You look out the street there, you'll actually see a number.
Well, not entering into a debate on this,
just to say but Councillor McCartan has to be corrected. What's on the street out there is a number of bicycle stands on that narrow street.
We're not simply put there during on this now.
So be careful what you're saying, Councillor McCartan. Open your eyes is what you need to do. Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Street, Councillor McCartan. That's all you got to do. Go down the end of the street and you'll see the new bicycle stands. Open your eyes.
Okay, we're moving on to motions. Thanks. Okay, Councillor Costello.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, just the background of this motion came from where I had seen across the UK initiatives to try and improve the traffic around schools. So Hackney was the first one I came across, which introduced a scheme called School Streets, where essentially they close off streets around schools so that only people who are living or working on the streets, there's also exemptions for people with disability tag, would be allowed to drive on that street during school collection and pickup times. This was to encourage the children into walking, cycling, public transport to school, which has all sorts of benefits. This was a huge success. Their neighbours Camden have taken it up. Islington Council are looking at it. Solihull Council in Birmingham have adopted it. East Lothian Council in Scotland have adopted similar things. Clackmannanshire on the other side of Edinburgh from East Lothian, I hope I'm pronouncing Clackmannanshire right, again embraced this. There's huge benefits to this for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's a huge reduction in traffic generally across the city. The NTA say that 30% of the traffic in the morning is the school run. If we can get that off the street, it makes the traffic better for everybody. I'm sure you all had much better commutes in the summer than now that the schools are back. There's also improved air quality. Research in England has shown that the air quality in schools is actually some of the lowest, and the air quality in classrooms is dangerously low. We don't really have the same level of air quality monitoring here, so we can't make those sort of statements. But certainly, this was producing massive health benefits for the teachers and the children in the schools. There was also improved quality of life for locals. I get huge amounts of emails from people complaining about cars that are double parked, cars that are blocking their driveway in as they're trying to get to work. And these are cars dropping kids to school. There's also improved quality of life for the kids, as well as the air quality. I think, as well as the air quality, there's an independence, there's exercise, there's all these sorts of benefits baked into it. I also think now is a really interesting time to do this because of obviously the need to address climate change, the rising case of obesity, but I think work on this can be woven into the Velo Cities project. We can create really a legacy for the city. We can create something that would be a jewel of the Velo Cities project while here, that we can learn from others, that others can learn from us. Just on the practical side of it, in reality this is not going to work for every school. It's not going to work for every street. Recently I got an email from a constituent complaining about issues around the traffic outside St Clair's and Harold's Cross. The Harold's Cross road is a major road. Obviously I'm not saying there we're going to ban traffic down that road, but opening up next to St Clair's soon enough is a school in the old Greyhound Stadium. And in behind it are a small network of small little roads. And the neighbours there are terrified that their roads are just going to become a car park when this school opens. And these are streets that would benefit from these kind of restrictions, ensuring that their streets don't become a car park and they still can enjoy their road. The same Clairville Road. There are 2 primary schools there. Again, there is huge amounts of people driving their kids to school, blocking in the neighbours. Clairville Road is a major road. Clairville Road has buses going down it. Clairville Road is staying at 50, where the roads off it are going at 30. So again, you can't close Clairville, but you can look at restrictions on the other roads. It's also, each council in England has done it differently. Hackney uses automatic number plate recognition. Camden uses barriers that the teachers control, and the teachers have the keys to lift up and down. So again, every council does it differently. Some might work better for them, some might work better for us. So what I'm looking to propose here is a pilot. And I think Dublin Beta projects really provide a strong template for how we can do this. I think the first thing that we need to do is look at what's happening in England. Look at what works. Look at how each council does it, how each council does it differently. Learn from them. Then we look at what are the key elements that we need. What schools will this work for? As I said, there are plenty of schools this won't work for. There are plenty that it will. And then we can go out and start trying to recruit schools, as I say, I think public consultation needs to be baked in from the very beginning of this, talking to the schools, the school communities, the neighbours. And I can tell you from certainly the emails I'm getting in relation to people being blocked into their driveways, a lot of the neighbours to the schools are going to like this. A lot of the kids are going to like this because they're going to get their independence back and being able to walk to school instead of being ferried between urban islands. So I think what I'm asking for with this motion is a pilot. And I think we should be pulling in Dublin Beta really to lead this. And I think that the public consultation needs to be baked into this. So I'm not looking for something radical overnight, but I think we should begin a process where we look at how we manage the school run, just because of the huge negative consequences it brings and the huge potential positives. And again, as I say, I think this is a pilot. This consultation is baked in from the beginning, and we take it slowly.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor McHugh.
Yeah, I can understand the sentiments of this motion, but I can't see it working. In my area, for example, the 122 passes up by the school. You can't stop the school bus. That's what you'd call that, the 122 at school time. It's the school bus. And up at the Assumption in Walkinstown, it's an infant school. They're all brought by car. Maybe we can identify, and maybe you're right, maybe through a pilot scheme we can identify an area and maybe try it out there. Possibly that's probably the way to go. I know there will be a lot of opposition to it, but the idea is brilliant and it's good, but I can't see it working.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McGinley.
Just very briefly, Chairman, we do need to get away from the idea that children need to be ferried by car to school. Well, sorry, I wasn't ferried by car to school, and I managed to get to school, so I'm afraid the world works. Don't need, from the age of 4, people are capable of moving. There are groups of children can gather together. Parents can walk with their kids. There are a number of different things, but this idea of 4x4s, herding like cattle in front of school gates and rocking people into driveways, that is nuts. It's also getting children off to a very bad start in life. To get the idea that the rain doesn't happen because I'm inside the car all the time. Well, sorry, rain does happen. You have a raincoat, you have an umbrella, you have a coat, you have Wellington boots, whatever you have. But it's an important part of people learning to live, and it's one of the reasons it causes health problems later on, because the immunity systems aren't there that were there. So look, there are all sorts of implications, but it simply isn't sustainable. And the sooner we get that message out, and I blame parents more than the children, because natural inclination of children would be to go out and play and to go out and to walk with their friends and walk with anybody else they know, whether they're older or younger, and that does work, has worked for hundreds of years, and for some reason we've got it into our heads. And Ireland, I think, is a bit of an outlier. My observations of what happens outside school gates is crazy. And
thanks, Councillor McGinley. Mr. Guiney.
Yeah, I have to say I'd have concerns around childhood obesity. I think children are far too sedate. So I think it'd be very interesting to see what the results of an experiment like this will be if it was piloted, because I think the upside could be very, very good if it worked out.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, not to do with NCVI, but just my own opinion. A lot of people these days, you are trying to pay rent or mortgage. You need both parents working. If the parent has to get to work at a certain time, they haven't got time to walk their child to school, walk back, get their car, and then drive to their job. So it's a practical issue. I'm sure they'd love to have time to do that, but they haven't. They have a job to get to. So back in the day when the mammy stayed home and minded the kids, that was grand. She walked the kids to school and back. Daddy went off to work in the car, or if he had one. But it's gone past that now, and people can't afford to rear children on one salary. It's not possible. So, well, for most people it's not. You're on a very big salary. So I think it is something that needs to be tried out, and there will be people who can do that and who are able to do that, and that's great, and encourage them to do it. But it's not going to be possible for every parent to walk their child to school or send the child off at a young age as well. That's the other concern. Back in the day, nobody worried about paedophiles and children being abducted and all of that. Now it's on the front of every parent's mind. It's a nightmare for parents rearing children these days. Plus traffic. Now, it's great that the traffic is getting slower. That's fantastic. But, you know, it's still to kind of let the children go off to school the way I was let off at 6 years of age, walked down to school by myself. That you wouldn't do that now. You'd be told you were a neglectful parent if you did that now. So, you know, as they groups of children with maybe one parent is a way around it, but it isn't entirely the parent's fault. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, as I said, there's more damage being done to children's backs by the amount of books they have to carry to school than there is by obesity. And again, to connect obesity into this situation, obesity is about what you eat. It really, you know, need to be clear on that particular matter. And all too often, there's a generalisation in relation to, you know, that children are obese because they're not walking. They're obese because they're actually eating very sugary foods, and that's very identified. Nonetheless, the UK is certainly piloted these schemes, and they're very successful in certain areas. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't put it up there and see if there's a possibility that we could pilot this particular scheme. You know, I think it could be interesting. It's probably an area where it could really work. And we shouldn't actually, you know, not proceed with that level. I mean, there's probably a school where it would work in, and let's try and find that school. But all the other kind of, you know, reasonings and, you know, walking to school and all the past and all of that, that's all gone. It's out the door. We're in a different era altogether. And you try and walk to school down the country these days, you'd be mowed down because of the speed of the cars. And in the city then, as I said, it's a very difficult place. Even if we were to get children to cycle on the push bikes on the footpath, Chairman, there's so many footpaths that are damaged. There's trees growing out of private gardens, you can't see a thing. So I think we have an obligation to at least attempt to address the issues for our children. And if we can find a suitable place to pilot a scheme, I don't see the reason why we shouldn't support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. For me,
just very quickly, I just want to support this motion, and just make the very strong point that it is a pilot motion. It is a pilot scheme, and that's the idea of a pilot scheme, is to test it out. And I know Councillor McHugh and Fiona Kelty raised some reservations, but I would support this motion.
Thanks. For my own sake, I'd actually support the motion because I do believe that it should be a pilot scheme in it, and if the perfect school for it, it's actually in Heney. There's one road, traffic coming in and out, blocking everything up. So there's yellow lines put down there recently to try and stop all the parents driving, just dropping the kids off. So it's a perfect place to use the pilot scheme.
Same as yourself, we actually have DCC coming out to our local schools tomorrow to try solve road parking problems outside the school. The school principal herself is trying to eliminate all cars from dropping kids off, because where the school is located, at the end of the road is a church and a housing estate. And the biggest issues are people from the housing estate can't get to work in the mornings because people are parking their cars on the road to go to the school. And this is being an issue that's been raised for a long time, but DCC is coming out tomorrow to actually see if they can alleviate it. And something like that could work there as a pre-plan.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. Is that motion agreed? Agreed. Okay, we'll move on to the next motion, which is motion 13. We're deferring that till the next meeting. We dealt with Councillor 14, Councillor Heney's. Motion 15, we'll defer. Motion 16, Councillor McHugh.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. A few months coming back from Wexford, I think it was, I noticed the signs for the Dunleary, for the what do you call it? the ferry in Dunleary. And obviously, we all know there's no ferry in Dunleary, but it is very misleading coming into the city, coming into the capital city, that you're being directed to a ferry that's not there. I don't know who we should write to about it, but I've asked that we'll write to the National Transport Authority, because it's definitely bringing people the wrong way. Thanks. Look for support of that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Thanks for your attendance. We'll see you at the next meeting.
Sorry, just any other business, Chairman?
Okay, AOB,
yes, please.
Yeah.
There's an issue arising in the Ringsend area where camper vans or camper vehicles are parking in certain streets, and the residents are beginning to get very concerned. These are parking in long stay. There's a number of them. There's huge issues down there. I contacted Dublin City Council, and this particular street's unregulated, and it means that they don't have any enforcement in it. But nonetheless, it is an issue. With vehicles of this nature becoming really cheap in the UK, there's a huge amount of imports of camper vans taking place into Ireland. They're being marketed at those who are seeking homes, a bit like the mobile home, but the regulation is becoming to be very, very difficult on it. I'd ask that it be addressed as a matter of urgency. Now, I did get a reply today from City Management, from Traffic, again saying that there's nothing they could really do about it. There's a couple of acts they can do, but by and large they can't if there's no enforcement. This is something that's going to creep up on us as more and more people are finding themselves in a situation where they've no accommodation. They can pick up one of these vehicles for a couple of grand, they bring it in, they register it, and lo and behold, they can stay in the streets. It's something that needs to be addressed, Chairman, and I'd ask that it be put on the agenda as soon as possible and we get a reply to it. Thank you.
In actual fact, Google Maps are to blame for that, because Google Maps recommended this place for camper vans to park up with the pubs and everything else around. But I'm sure the management are going to change it. Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, just this issue, Chairman, if I may, it's actually not just people who are coming in to visit the city, but it's actually people who are actually going to live there now. It's different altogether now. It's not a visitor. Thank you.